everyone for coming along. My name is Danny McNamara and I am one of the co-chairs of Green Left. Green Left, of course, being the eco-socialist tendency within the Green Party of England and Wales. For those who have just joined in the last 30 seconds or last minute, we are recording this, so if you prefer not to be recorded, then please do switch your cameras off. And can I ask please that everyone puts themselves on mute when they're not speaking, and that can help us minimise extraneous noise. We're not running the transcription service, so I am going to ask everyone please to speak very clearly and try not to speak too fast in the interests of inclusivity. We are planned to run until 8:30. We haven't scheduled any breaks, so we're straight through for an hour and a half. But if you do need to take a break, then please do it whatever time suits you. Someone has just said in the chat, enabled closed caption. Pete, is the option that you're looking for as host if you want to switch on the transcription. Now, also, I think because we're inclusive, can I ask people please not to fill the chat with lots of opinion and comment all the time, because sometimes that can create a very high kind of cognitive overload for some of us who find it difficult to follow what is being said in the meeting and what is being added in the chat, and trying to process on multiple threads simultaneously can become problematic. If you wish to speak at any point, then please ideally raise your Zoom hand, and you can do that using the Zoom controls normally at the bottom of your screen. But if you can't do that, then by all means, please just do whatever works for you. And if that means calling out, then we're an inclusive organisation, as I say, please call out. But ideally, if you can, please use your Zoom hand. So welcome to this evening's meeting. This is the next in a series of special speaker meetings that Green Left has been organising on key topics. This evening's focus, I wonder if I could ask the user whose username is Anne, please to go on mute, because we are getting quite a lot of background noise there. So in fact, can I extend it and ask everyone to make sure they're on mute? So our focus, as we've said, is how to combat the Cumbria Coalmine and other retrograde energy projects. And some of you may know that James Hansen, who is one of the most highly respected climate scientists around, I think, bar none, has recently published a report which admittedly is out for peer review. So it's not by no means universally accepted, or it's not widespread consensus amongst the scientific community yet, but with a reputation like Hansen's, it may well be very soon. And he effectively in this report now calculates that if it were not for atmospheric pollution, then we already have effectively 2 degrees of global warming today. The reason why we don't register that just now is that the pollutants in the atmosphere currently have the effect of cooling things down. But as we move to clean up our air, as China reduces its reliance on coal-fired power stations or introduces cleanliness measures around the use of coal, so those pollutants will begin to reduce, and we will be very rapidly exposed to the true underlying amount of global warming that we already have locked in as a consequence, not of greenhouse gases that will be emitted into the atmosphere tomorrow or next week or next year, but the historical accumulation of greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere now already. And as I say, we're already at that 2 degrees point, but he also reckons in this report that because of that historical accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today already, we inevitably, and he means inevitably, will mean that we will experience 2.5 degrees, 2.5 by the end of this century, which is just over 70 years away. So it's like a lifetime or even less. And of course 2.5, everyone knows that the kind of ecosystems upon which human life depends begin to break down really quite rapidly at that stage. But he also believes inevitably, because of this historical accumulation of greenhouse gases, that we are on an escalator that will end at 10 degrees of global warming. That's just inconceivable. That is, of course, unless somehow we manage to find a way of removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Really, that's the only hope. And his message is that rather than contributing further to the problem, we really need to be working very hard to reverse the problem. In some ways, his report is an outlier just now, but my own feeling is that the epicenter of scientific consensus is going increasingly to move in the direction of recognizing how bad the problem really is. And some of you may have noticed over the weekend, pardon me, a news report, and this covered some work being done by scientists who have used the DNA of a 4 million-year-old species of octopus, effectively to prove that the last time we had global temperatures similar to what we have today, which was 125,000 years ago, the western Antarctic ice sheet collapsed. And of course, if that were to happen again, and it very well might, pardon me, then sea levels could rise by between 3 and 4 meters, with absolutely devastating impacts, as you can imagine, on the lives, not least of the 670 million people who live in low-lying areas around the world. So, every day, I think the message becomes clearer and clearer, and yet fossil fuel companies are still pursuing maximum extraction. And at the same time, our own government is selling licenses for exploration and development for North Sea oil and gas. They have, as we're ready to discuss this evening, recently approved a new coal mine in Cumbria, and they're constantly pushing hydrogen as a solution to the problem of climate change. And so this evening, to help us wrestle with this problem of the contrast between what the science is telling us and what policy and corporate organisations are actually doing about it, we have 3 special guests who will each focus on a different aspect of this evening's issue and this evening's topic. So we have a panel of 3 special guests this evening. First off, we're going to hear from, I'll introduce them all first and then we'll hear from them individually. But first of all, we're going to hear from ALLAN Robottom. ALLAN has been along to provide us with a contribution to a previous meeting organised by Green Left. ALLAN is a member of the steering group of the campaign against climate change, and she's a contributor to this rather splendid book here, Climate Jobs, Building a Workforce for the Climate Emergency. That's a campaign against climate change trade union group publication. ALLAN has worked with Leeds Trades Council, the Climate Justice Coalition, and the Stop Burning Trees Coalition. We also have with us this evening Tina Rothery. Tina is well known, I think, as a co-founder of Nanas Against Fracking, and Tina has been prominent in direct action against several fracking projects. More broadly, she's a writer, environmental campaigner, focusing on opposition to fracking, works with 0 Hour on their Climate and Ecology Bill, and has been involved with Occupy London. And then completing this evening's triumvirate, we have ALLAN TODD. ALLAN is a member of the National Council of Left Unity. He's a climate activist, an anti-fascist activist, and he's a writer with a growing number of books to his credit, including his next book, which will focus on Che Guevara. So what's going to happen is that each of these speakers will speak for 10-15 minutes in turn, and then we'll open up for Q&A and general discussion. And first up, as previously indicated, we'll hear from Ellen Robottom, and Ellen's selected topic is the carbon capture hydrogen biomass complex, not too big to challenge. So over to you, Ellen.
How do I share my screen, please?
So Pete will allow you to do it. And if you click share screen at the bottom of your screen, can you see?
Yep. Right.
And then select whichever application you're using to display the presentation file in.
I believe it's this one. And then share. Yep. Okay. And then hopefully go to slideshow. Come on.
Yeah, it sometimes takes a little moment. So
yeah.
If you top left, click on from current slide. Oh no, you want to probably scroll from the beginning. Yeah.
That's it. Yes. I'm sorry if you can things around so it's not obscured. I'm just showing this because it's easier than just reading from notes as much as anything. But yeah, not too big to challenge. It often feels as if it is too big to challenge because it is really a juggernaut and so many things interconnected. So as I've said, it's on this slide, a glimpse of the big picture and whether that can kind of give us, show us a way into thinking about how we can connect up these different campaigns against different specific installations and retrograde technologies. So thought about what are the common elements between these different technologies that we want to look at, or these different moves, let's say. So the concept of net zero by 2050 is absolutely crucial. It anchors the whole thing. It's an absolute scam, obviously. It allows really catastrophic delay. It allows a backloading of the cuts towards the end of that period, which isn't going to be any good because the carbon budget will be gone long before that. And the reliance on these still unproven technologies that we're going to be talking about. But it also supports the reliance on the carbon markets, the offsets, the carbon removals, which is a green light for business as usual, of course. The profit motive, we talk about the market system. What the market system actually is massive lobbying for huge public subsidies that to give confidence to investors lobbying for these policy pathways that reassure the investors that their fossil fuels aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And that's backed up by massive greenwash and disinformation. And it's worth noticing in this context that the greenwash isn't just about the technologies, it's about the jobs that are promised as well. So the technologies, the key technologies in this, what I've called a complex, carbon capture, hydrogen, so-called carbon removals, they're all kind of bound together by this fact that they're all there essentially to support the continuation of fossil fuels, and that they share a common kind of, that they're bound together technologically by the reliance on the CO2 pipelines and the storage. It's worth being aware that the industrial decarbonisation strategy is based on focusing on these 6 clusters of high emitting industries. And I'm going to focus probably more on the East Coast cluster because that's where I am in Leeds. This comprises a consortium of energy and foundational manufacturing industries called Zero Carbon Humber, another one called Net Zero Teesside, and then the Northern Endurance Partnership headed by BP, which is operating supposedly the CO2 storage under the North Sea. and this revolves around this. So this cluster revolves around the production of so-called low carbon hydrogen. I imagine that most people in this room are aware that what's actually meant by that is the so-called blue hydrogen, which is produced from natural gas, which is mostly methane, with carbon dioxide as a byproduct. So it's the it's methane reforming with carbon capture and storage, and this is what the clusters all revolve around, but in a very, very complex way. So the production of so-called low carbon hydrogen to be used by industries that require hydrogen for very high heat processes, for example, but equally supposedly require carbon capture to take away their process emissions. And the whole, I won't read the whole thing, but I think it's very easy to see that the kind of, the overall kind of thrust of all this is to really lock in a reliance on the blue hydrogen and the carbon removals at the expense of really pushing for genuine decarbonisation, electrification where possible, and so on. So it very much is a barrier to anything that we could call genuine decarbonisation or anything like. That's just a picture of the equivalent. Sorry. It was just a picture of the equivalent cluster on the west coast, which is the HyNet cluster, which is again revolves all around the production of blue hydrogen for industry and also supposedly for homes. This is one of the big issues that we're talking about, and the supposed removals of the carbon dioxide from the blue hydrogen manufacture and also from a number of industrial installations. So yeah, on the west coast as on the east coast, one of the most contentious ideas is that the hydrogen will be pumped into homes to replace domestic gas. We'll come back to that shortly. What I didn't mention in the previous slide, but one, but you'll see it's there. The carbon, so-called carbon removals or negative emissions technologies. So in the Humber, in the zero Humber part of the East Coast cluster, Drax biomass power station is positioned as very, very key. And the reason for that is because it's completely acknowledged that that blue hydrogen and industries with carbon capture are not going to remove all the emissions at all. So therefore they're going to have to supposedly offset this with negative emissions or so-called carbon removals. People again probably aware of the story around Drax, that they're applying for a development consent order to fit carbon capture to their some of their biomass burners, and because the smokestack emissions counted as zero because of this fallacious idea that burning wood in large scale is actually carbon neutral, because supposedly the trees grow back overnight or instantaneously or whatever, and resequester the carbon that's being lost by burning. So they're allowed to account the smokestack emissions as zero, and consequently any emissions that they remove will be classed as negative emissions or emissions removals. Obviously, it's a scam, and it's a scam that's largely designed to attract further subsidies, very, very substantial subsidies. But in terms of the government policy and in terms of the rhetoric around the industries involved, the negative emissions at Drax are deemed to be absolutely critical to the overall zero carbon pathway. Carbon capture and storage greenwash is absolutely the centerpiece of the fuels giants' attempts to paint their operations as green. I mean, you go on the websites of these various oil and gas giants, and they're talking about carbon neutral gas and, well, what they actually mean is carbon neutral extraction and processing only. They don't look at upstream and downstream emissions. They don't care what happens to it. They don't care about the burning of it. But also, even at that limited definition, they're not carbon neutral at all. All they mean is that they've invested in some capture and storage somewhere, or potentially bought some negative emissions from a corporation such as Drax. I think people are well aware, really, of this, that this the greenwashing that surrounds carbon capture. I don't know how many people are generally aware that that Saudi Arabia actually sort of brought about a doctoring of the last IPCC report, the summary for policymakers that they do. They insist on having a lot of positive references to carbon capture inserted into it. So that's, another example, the sort of capture of the narrative by those corporations and and by the oil states. Yeah, the reality in the real world, the capture rate from any carbon capture installation has never ever come consistently anywhere close to its nameplate efficiency, its nameplate capture rate. And I mean very, very far from it, like we're talking 50–60%. Can I, yeah, previous. But also the picture for carbon capture in hydrogen production is similar, if not worse. Apparently there are only 4 blue hydrogen projects in operation worldwide. And the one with the highest capture rate only captures 43% of its CO2 emissions. The reason is that they're not capturing it for climate reasons. They're not capturing it in order to remove emissions. They're capturing it because CO2 is a saleable commodity. So they capture the amount that they're able to sell to oil companies for enhanced oil recovery. So it's a little bit up in the air as to how much they could capture if it was done properly, but there is no, as it stands at the moment, there's no incentive for them to do it properly, and it's likely to be a very long-term technological project if it ever materialises at all. So constantly see government and industry statements that this technology, carbon capture, is proven. It's quite simply false. It's a lie. So again, the story about low carbon hydrogen, the fact is that the vast majority of the world's hydrogen currently is produced from fossil fuels with no mitigation, no carbon capture. So if we're going to have hydrogen with carbon capture, or if we're going to have, indeed, we're going to have green hydrogen produced from electrolysis of water, the priority has to be to decarbonise existing hydrogen production. And it will be impossible to do all of it. Of course, we want to be eliminating the oil refineries. We want to be reducing these products as much as we possibly can. But that has to be the first priority for the use of whatever hydrogen we can produce. As I've already covered, really, blue hydrogen from fossil fuels with carbon capture isn't clean when you count in the fugitive methane emissions from the natural gas extraction and transportation, and the additional quantity of the energy for producing the blue hydrogen. The CO2 emissions are even higher than just burning the gas.
Ellen, could I just say, if we've got maybe about 3 minutes left, let's say.
Thanks for that. So what I'll do is I'll just skip the I'll skip the technicalities and just go on to how do we combat it, because I think people are pretty aware of the technological problems, and we want to talk about how we can deal with it. So I mean, I think the key, the priority is to really get very, very systematic about stepping up the organising in our trade unions. We really have to challenge. I think we have to be much more serious about challenging, the current policy that stands in support of this this programme, this pathway. as I've mentioned, what I've called here the job washing rhetoric, the claims for job creation are so hugely inflated, but it's one of the key things that, of course, the industry plays on, and which they, many of the trade unions have been incited to sort of support it for those reasons. But actually there is massive greenwashing around the projected job numbers, and if you go into it, it really, yes, you get a big peak in jobs at certain points in the construction process, but after that they go down very low, and there's no discussion of redeployment plans. So I'm just thinking about other things that work. We're going to talk about anti-fracking campaigns, and I think they do provide a very strong model of how more people are brought in, because it's a thing that happens on their own doorsteps, and people very quickly become more radicalized and more politicized once they start organizing around a thing like that. And it strikes me that in terms of things like the DRACs, the biomass, and the bioenergy with carbon capture campaign, the thing that might really get people mobilized is actually the dangers of the pipeline, because it believe me, it's dangerous, and it's going to go through a lot of people's communities and near their schools and so on. Similarly with the proposals to put hydrogen into people's homes, which will be both not only disruptive but very expensive and dangerous too. Again, the subsidies, at a time of high energy prices, people are aware of the obscenity of the fossil fuel profits. So, but I think that, what I really want to conclude on is that I'm just trying to think through how it is that we can link up these different campaigns around the fracking, the coal mines, the DRACs and new oil fields and so on, not to detract from individual campaigns, but actually to support and increase the impact of those in a way by looking at what connects them. And they're all ways of greenwashing fossil fuels. Essentially, they're all ways of locking in fossil fuels, and they're all supported by these massive programs of greenwashing. So I think that we have ways where we can work together as well as separately on these different campaigns. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Ellen. Ellen, perhaps I wonder if you'd be prepared to share, maybe you could send a copy of that slide pack to Pete or Jay as your sort of email correspondent. I personally would like a copy, so if Pete or Jay receive a copy of that, I'd be very grateful. A lot of good stuff in there, and much of what you said, particularly about trade unions and getting to the truth of the job positions that, as claimed by these big corporations, will be music to the ears of at least some members of Green Left who recently have been talking a lot about working through the various trade unions of which we are members in order trying to shift some of the positions that really appear to be pro-fossil fuels, ostensibly in the interests of jobs, but failing to appreciate the much bigger job opportunities that come with a true investment commitment to renewables and to insulation and all of those things that are part of the solution rather than the problem. So thank you very much indeed, Ellen. I said earlier that our second speaker was going to be Tina Rothery, and Tina's topic this evening is pulling ourselves together, informing, engaging and activating within our communities. So Tina, over to you.
Evening. So it's so nice to see faces I know in the room, and thank you so much for the invitation, Jay and Danny. When I saw the title of this evening, which is how to combat the Cumbria Coalmine and other retrograde energy projects and policies, my first instinct is to outlaw them. It astounds me that we have a legally binding law by the Climate Change Act to reduce our emissions, and yet we keep kicking the can down the road, and it seems that no one is accountable. I remain forever stunned and unsure of how we came to this point of impotence, and I was so delighted to see that Friends of the Earth has taken a legal action against the government over this proposed coal mine. Because how can we just keep doing this, and why is the law on their side and not on ours? Why? And that's why I went to work for the Climate and Ecology Bill, because I really just got sick of standing in front of trucks and stopping them, as Alan will attest, that really, you know, you look at this room, we're the people who are trying to stop the illegal behavior. And then they're bringing out laws to try and stop us from stopping them from their illegal behavior. It's quite stunning how we tolerate this without actually having a full-on rebellion. So what have we learned from the anti-fracking movement, I suppose, is what I came here to discuss. And it's really hard because, again, it wasn't something where once we set out to campaign against it, anyone had a plan or a website much to do, that we thought we didn't know how we were going to do it. And we really didn't, pretty much from a day-to-day basis. It was a knee-jerk reaction every time to something the industry did, because we weren't driving this. They were. The same with the coal mine. You know, they're going to put something in your community and you're just going to have to fight back. And the first place to start with that was to look at informing the population. So we went round to, and I'm sure they're doing this as well on the campaign here, is just went round to the full area around the, you know, where that would be impacted most directly, and did house to house, you know, and just went to the doors and said, do you realize there's going to be a fracking site? And we were assured continuously by residents, no, that's okay, love. It's just natural gas, lots of jobs, and there's no problems at all with it, because they'd had the propaganda, lies, and essentially bullshit from the industry shoved through their doors and at public meetings. So we had to combat that. And so we started setting up our own public meetings and just delivering really plain truths. And I think one of the pieces of advice I'd give to doing that sort of thing is never over exaggerate, because really this stuff does not need exaggerating. It is bad. It's going to be bad. And it's going to cause harm. And yes, it will impact health, and it will impact on our well-being and our nature and climate and everything else. And those are just plain facts, and they don't need enhancing. And the second you enhance a little bit, someone will tear you down on social media. Keeping your credibility is so hard. We were really lucky with people like ALLAN TODD, who organized our Green Mondays for us and brought us really credible speakers, where you could see if George Monbiot turned up, or, you know, Jeremy Corbyn, anybody who turned up who was considered probably a, you know, right-thinking person and not some radical crazy activist standing in front of a truck. You know, suddenly even the police and the security guards were listening and maybe taking in and understanding why we were there. You know, we had academics come, Julia Steinberger and people like that. Getting those sorts of people on our side were really vital. But not just that, there's the other side too. You know, we had celebrities, and I remember getting really chastised when we went with Vivienne Westwood on a tank to David Cameron's house to declare a war on fracking. And oh, it's really sad. I so miss her. Anyway, so, and everyone's saying, well, that's just a gimmick. Yes, it was a gimmick. But that night, when I was checking social media, I saw that a magazine in Japan called Nylon, which I'm not sure if it was about the industry or fetishism, I'm not quite sure, I had this big article about fracking in the UK. I thought, well, we would never have reached that. We wouldn't have been in there, except that they liked Vivienne. So that was it. And Emma Thompson came to dance, you know, and people relate to different aspects of the campaign. No campaign can be myopic in its focus or its expected audience. The audience is everyone, and different people will speak to different aspects of it. And again, Bez from the Happy Mondays was talking to the media one day, and he was getting flustered because, you know, the media were not being good. And so he shoved me in front of him and just said, look, I can't say it, just whatever she says. And then he said he felt bad that he couldn't find the level of communication for media. But by the same token, when he got on stage in Salford later that night, wearing a nanotabard and said, stop fracking, the whole room erupted. I mean, there are audiences we can't reach as individuals, but someone else can. And that brings us back to what Ellen said at the beginning. It's about uniting. It's about uniting all our campaigns on this. I mean, I feel quite lucky that fracking happened to be the one that I focused on, because it was one issue. And I thought, what a waste of time. I can't believe I'm going to spend my time doing this when there's so much else I want to be getting on with. But fracking, much like a single coal mine, once you start peeling back the layers of how that ended up in your community, risking your health and your natural habitats, once that happens, you can say, well, they lied to you in the press release about this. The government colluded because the government does, and this is how it did it. And that, you know, they're going to fob you off with carbon capture and storage, but it doesn't actually work. But once you start unraveling, you show the process of how corrupted and bad that was. And I think for us here in Lancashire, when we finally got a no to fracking out from our council in 2015, it brought us so many more people to our campaign when Westminster then overturned that. Because if you weren't angry enough about fracking, you were damn well angry at the loss of democracy. And the same way now that we have, you know, protesters who are like, well, why can't I protest? Don't tell me I can't be loud or, you know, annoying or inconvenient. That's just neither here nor there. What's a coal mine if not loud, annoying, inconvenient, and downright deadly and dangerous and against the law? I hasten to add that we're just choosing to ignore. So informing the local population is super important, but also working out how can you make, you know, whether you call it activism or campaigning, suitable for everyone, you know? So we had our Wednesday mornings where it was a sort of a safe space for women where we'd all get together, and we knew we probably weren't going to get arrested because what we were doing was holding a minute's silence, you know, dancing and sharing food and trying to have some time during that really nasty 1,000 days of horrible protest that was mostly full of police violence and brutality and awful weather, which really didn't help. So your cold morning, 7 a.m. and you're freezing your butt off and you look like Michelin Man and you fall down and someone's got to pick you up. And, you know, but we, you know, that the community here endured that. Some days there were only 7 people. Sometimes there were like 2,000 people. It just depended on the day. But getting a space for every type of activist. So there will be people in the community who want to engage and say no to the coal mine, but they aren't going to stand on a street. They're not going to stop a truck. But they will write a letter, they will write to the paper, they will write to their MP and sign a petition, or they will come down with food for the people who are standing at the site. You have to provide those places and make people feel welcome and valued for any contribution. You know, every car that went past and beeped at us in support, to me, it was like food, you know, that was the nourishment. And that also was, for a lot of people, their first step into activism. You know, maybe they thought, oh, I'm not like them, but yeah, good on you, mate. So they did it. And then they went and thought about that. And one guy who did it came and he beeped his horn and the police walked over to him and said, if you do that again, we're going to arrest you, which upset this man so very, very much that he went away. And the following week, we called him Mr. Honking in the end. The following week, he came back with 100 vehicles beeping. And it was just absolutely beautiful. But who could have predicted that? You know, we can plan our campaigns all we like, but it's the unexpected surprises that come along. Like when ALLAN decided to do the Green Mondays, that was just inspired. And it was something he could do that none of us was capable of doing. Because when you're roadside all the time, you can't possibly be doing admin and writing emails as often as you'd like. Although we were up until many late hours doing that. So it's about that, providing opportunities, providing somewhere that, yeah, this is going to be an ongoing protest. I would imagine it's going to last. So you lose hope a lot. And it is sad and really hard. And you lose time with your family. You lose income. You lose reputation. You know, I certainly tried to find a job. It's a nightmare after all this. However, there has to be some reason to keep pulling you back other than just your own moral conscience. So creating a place where people want to come, and it really helps, you know, and we did with creating events and things that would occur at the site, inviting local musicians. We had like people come and teach us how to play percussion. We knew it would annoy the security staff and the cops to listen to really inexperienced percussion people playing percussion all day. We got taught how to Morris dance, and they stole my sticks off me because they said I wasn't using them as I should. And admittedly, they were good to have as a threatening thing. We learned to be a samba band. You know, if you're going to be in a place for a long time, provide yourself with a lot of other things to have going on. And plus, what you don't think about is just standing and stopping a truck as individual humans sometimes doesn't stop the truck. But if you've got a band there and you've got a big drum in front of you and the police are trying to move you out of the way, you're a lot harder to handle. So creativity and making the place somewhere that people relate to, like every day in the early days, walking up the hill and seeing it being birthed, this horrid rig appearing on the horizon. And you were seeing it, and it was just breaking your heart every day. The bigger it got, the smaller we felt, you know? So a local uniform maker said, look, I've got loads of fabric that I'm sending to landfill. Do you want to intercept that and have it for your lot and do something with it? So yes. And he provided it suitably shredded. So we had ribbons, and we started doing ribbon art. Well, I started just tying ribbons just because it would keep me busy and stop me having aggressive moments with the police. It would focus you. But then other people who had far more creative art skills would come along, and they made planets out of it. They made the earth with blues and greens, and they did the rig, and they did all sorts of beautiful artwork on this like Harris fencing. And they kept trying to tear it down, and we just kept putting it up, and they tear it down and we put it up. We had nothing else to do with our time. We were just there anyway. So it's those sorts of things, be unexpected. Like the whole point to the nanas was really, you know, I remember Barton Moss, which was probably the worst anti-fracking site I've ever been to for violence from the Greater Manchester Police. Were awful, and it was dark, it was winter, it was muddy, and there was no media, and it was in the back area, and the brutality there was unlike I'd seen anywhere else. And so when we go along with some of the women, we would deliberately stand at the front right next to the police so that the regular campaigners could get a break, get it eased off. And also, you know, I'm next to 80-plus-year-old Ann Power on one side, and other ladies who were older. And for the police to bear down and hurt us, even though they did it, they felt bad about it. That helps, you know, that they felt bad. And they didn't treat us with the same brutality. And it was surprising to them to have people who looked like their sister, their mother, their grandma, you know, standing in front of them saying no. And I think that's really important to show our diversity. So uniting with others, but also
sorry, Tina, perhaps two more minutes, perhaps.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize it'd been that long. I thought I wouldn't have anywhere near enough to say. Silly me. Uniting with unions, we tied in with unions. NGOs couldn't have done it without Friends of the Earth. They were the back room to us, as well as the front room when we needed them. But in the back, they were telling us when planning applications changed. They were telling us when breaches occurred. They were giving us information that they could see publicly, but we couldn't. We just weren't having the time for it. We, you know, when we turned up with demonstrations, they'd be there ahead of us, you know, with signs and organizational skills. And when we left, they were still there clearing up after us to make sure that we didn't get a bad reputation. So, but in the end, what wins it? What wins it is to find out, what do they fear the most? What they fear the most in industry is loss of money, loss of reputation, and failure. So we hit them by not just delaying the trucks for the sake of delaying the trucks. It cost them money. They had to reschedule the trucks. We then wrote to every supplier and said to them, we would appreciate it if you stopped serving this site. If they didn't pull out, we would tell them that we would target them because we considered them the same as the frackers. So like a house building company, no, you know, an aggregate that was providing for house builders in the area, we said, we'll stop your trucks from leaving your site. And they said, well, but they're not all for the fracking. We're like, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? But then they feared for their reputation in the house building trade. I watched their share price go from $1.20 in Australia down to 3 cents. I watched it grow when they had good publicity, and I watched it fall when we were winning. Let me just make sure I'm not going to miss anything, because I didn't realize how little time I had. We need to work with the unions very much as well, because I feel very bad for workers. Workers are being left behind. And these people who work in these industries are fearful for their jobs and their livelihoods. But again, 1 Million Climate Jobs is one of the best booklets I ever read at the beginning of all this. It showed me that everything is possible, that we could be insulating homes and doing, you know, renewable energy. And I read a guy who used to work in the oil industry had now switched over to, I don't know, servicing wind farms. And he was out on a boat heading out to the wind farm, and someone said to him, you know, what's it like? What's by comparison? He said, look at me. I'm in a job that's not going to run out. It's always going to be there. It's clean. It's safe. I feel good about it. I go home to my kids and they're not upset with me. You know, why are we not gifting all the good stuff? And why the hell are we not hitting them with a law, which is why I'm working with the Climate and Ecology Bill, which is a law currently passing. It's had 3 readings in the Lords, it's now in the Commons, and we really want to get it passed or into manifestos, anybody with any influence on your political parties. And it would basically outlaw this. It would say, if you are going to breach our legally binding agreements, it can't happen. This should never have started. We shouldn't have had fracking on the table, and we shouldn't have another coal mine on the table. So I think we need to use, so I don't know what I ended up being in summary, but in summary, take everything you've got, throw everything you're at it, make sure there's room for everybody, and do not allow them to divide you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tina. I mean, I have to say that is just so inspiring, and I know that for many of us, the idea of activism often involves coming along to meetings like this and really meeting with like-minded people and sort of joining together to lament the sorry state of the world and maybe joining a picket line here and there, or writing a letter to an MP or to the local press or whatever. But to hear from someone who's really been on the front line, you know, toe-to-toe with the police, toe-to-toe with the representatives of the corporations and with security staff, involving such a wide diversity of different people, involving such a wide diversity of different activities, and effectively turning things into a carnival. Although I realise that, you know, sometimes if there's only 7 of you at 7 AM in a muddy field in the dark being assaulted by security staff and police officers, it doesn't feel anything at all like carnival. That was absolutely wonderful, and such a refreshing change from what is often a very theoretical approach to these questions. That was very practical and useful. And I said earlier, our third speaker is going to be ALLAN TODD. And ALLAN this evening is going to talk about opposing new coal from Coates to Blockadia. And I think we just have to do a little bit of setting up here, because ALLAN is going to use some slides, but the slides will be operated for him by Pete. So Pete, are you already with ALLAN's slides? Over to you, ALLAN.
Yeah, yeah. This has revealed how technically ungifted I am, and that I couldn't do it for myself. So if we could have number 1, that's it. Lovely. Well, there are so many environmental reasons why this proposed coal mine shouldn't go ahead. We've got melting polar ice caps, the Amazon nearing tipping points, rapidly increasing losses of animal, plant species, and extreme weather events. All of that make it absolutely clear why this mine should be opposed. And this hard right Tory government support for a new coal mine, along with its approval for new oil and gas projects, its dash for growth and plans for investment zone, they're all going to make this already dire situation even worse, as we heard at the beginning. If we could have number 2, please, Pete. One reason why we need to oppose this new coal mine came last year, when the Environment Agency estimated that several parts of Cumbria are likely to be lost to rising sea levels by 2050 if global warming reaches 2 degrees. Well, as Danny just said at the beginning, it looks like we're going to go beyond 2 degrees if we're not too careful. And Cumbria has also had, as I can see there are some Cumbrian people here tonight, we've already had 3 devastating once-in-a-lifetime floods since 2005. And let's not forget that in 2018, the IPCC said we 12 years to enact, and I quote, rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. Well, we've got 7 years left. The latest COP reports show virtually all their previous predictions have proved too conservative, and that the predicted changes are happening much more severely and much more rapidly than they originally estimated. Yet since 2018, not only have most key indicators worsened, it's clear that right now, the dirty energy companies, with massive help from governments, are intent on increasing their greenhouse gas emissions. If we could have number 3 here, which is particularly pertinent to the local situation at the moment. There are many myths about this mine. Myths is a polite way of calling something that is really a lie. The decision to approve the new coal mine has obviously proved very controversial here, locally, nationally, internationally. COP26 in 2021 agreed to reduce coal production, so the controversy shouldn't come as a surprise. But it's probably why the Tories therefore postponed announcing their decision on the mine until after COP27 had ended. Now, West Cumbria Mining, as I think probably most of you know, is owned by a hedge fund based in Australia, but it's registered in the tax haven that some people call the Cayman Islands. They've been forced to admit that 85 to 90% of production will be exported, and yet local Tory politicians, such as Workington's MP, Copeland's mayor, they continue to make, in quotes, misleading claims such as, for as long as we need steel, we'll need coking coal, or that the mine will reduce the UK steel industry's need for imported coke. They do so despite the fact that Chris MacDonald, Chief Executive Officer of the materials processing industry, which operates on behalf of the UK steel industry, having made it absolutely clear that the mine is not needed. The two biggest steel producers in the UK, Tata Steel and British Steel, are both on record as saying they won't be using that Cumbrian coke, either because, like steel plants across Europe, they're rapidly decarbonising production by using clean hydrogen, or because the Cumbrian coke has too high a sulphur content. And in fact, because of the fast drive to green steel, it's estimated that by the mid-2030s, many steel companies will have moved away from coal completely. In fact, a German firm has just announced it will be selling green steel by 2025 and will be fully zero carbon by 2033. Another Tory argument for the mine is that it'll stop the UK being dependent on imports from Russia. This has been put forward by Mike Starkey, Copeland's unelected Tory mayor. I should explain that for those that are not local. He got elected on "there's no place for party politics in local government" ticket, and then once he was elected, decided all of a sudden he'd become a Tory. He, like other Tory supporters of the mine, has cynically tried to link the mine to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yet that too doesn't agree with the facts. Again, coming back to Chris MacDonald, who, unlike the local Tories, does know what he's talking about. He's on record as saying, and I quote again, "It would not displace a single ton of Russian coking coal." In fact, Tata Steel has recently stated it doesn't use any Russian coke at all. If we could have number 4 now, please, Mike. Pete, sorry, yeah. The people of Cumbria don't need what one steel industry leader has called an 1850s technology. A technology, it's worth remembering, that's left many ex-miners on the west coast of Cumbria suffering from black lung disease. Between 2001 and 2015, that disease killed almost 9,000 former UK miners. And the next one, please. Pete, thanks. What's needed here are clean, green jobs, and both Cumbria Action for Sustainability and the Local Government Association have produced detailed studies showing how between 6,000 and 9,000 jobs could come to Cumbria via a programme of clean, renewable energy and massive home insulation. And unlike the coal mine, such a programme would mean lower household energy bills, thus taking hundreds of Cumbrian families out of fuel poverty. We suspect that the real reason why Tory politicians locally and nationally are lobbying so hard for an Australian-based hedge fund is a desperate attempt to hold on to at least some of the red wall Labour seats that they won in 2019. Next one, please, Pete. Now, although the government approved the proposed new coal mine for Cumbria in December last year, at present, West Cumbria Mining's 2021 accounts show that they have a shortage of funds and will need to raise the extra money from their partners in order to begin any work. The proposed mine is on the former site of various chemicals companies, which have left behind lots of very contaminated hazardous waste, mainly heavy metals, which is apparently amongst the most contaminated waste in the whole of the UK. Currently, that's capped off underground by concrete slabs, a job that was carried out by a company which in the end decided that the safest thing to do with all that waste was to leave the site undisturbed. Importantly, the contaminated land designation that had been put on it was only removed on condition that those concrete slabs remained in place. Yet West Cumbria Mining, as well as not having sufficient money, also haven't even got any expert staff. Consequently, to date, they haven't done any of the scientific investigations required to see if mining safely beneath this waste is feasible, nor have they done any assessments of how they'll dispose of this hazardous waste. To do so, they'll need to remove the concrete blocks safely and then transport the waste to somewhere safe, and there isn't a hazardous waste facility in Cumbria. In addition, they've been told they need to construct a new drift tunnel over the top of an old anhydrite mine, which is currently full of toxic waste, and they need to do that without disturbing it. This was one reason why in 2017, the Environment Agency recommended refusal of the mine proposal, because they feared it would probably escape into the Irish Sea. And as neither they nor we yet know whether all of this can be done safely, it's somewhat risky to have given planning permission before all the relevant studies have been carried out. Next one, please, Pete. So we're now into this position of court challenges. And although national and local environmental groups and individuals continue to make the important climate and political cases against the mine, the main practical opposition at the moment is currently via two legal challenges, one by Friends of the Earth and the other one by Southlake Action on Climate Change. And they are essentially over the CO2 emissions, which it's argued haven't been properly considered by the government, thus making their approval of the mine unlawful. On the 13th of January, both Southlake's Action on Climate Change and Friends of the Earth filed the relevant papers for their challenges, beginning the first steps in the legal process. SLAC, which had already filed a pre-action protocol letter in December, lodged their papers at the High Court in Manchester, asking for permission to launch a legal challenge via a statutory review of the government's decision to grant planning permission for the new coal mine. They should hear from the courts by the 1st of March whether their legal challenge can go ahead. But the legal process could be dragged out until June. In the meantime, SLAC are asking people to log on to their update page and indicate their willingness to donate towards additional legal funds if any are needed. At present, though, further donations aren't required. And I have put up all the relevant links into the chat, and I'll do again at the end in case somebody came late and missed them. Yet, even if the court challenges are won, the government could simply reissue a new permission that's only slightly different from the current one. However, even if in the end the permission for the mine is allowed to stand, West Cumbria Mining will still need to obtain necessary permission licenses from both the Coal Authority and the Marine Management Organisation. And an important point to note is that if West Cumbria Mining do finally get all the necessary legal permissions to go ahead, despite what Starmer's said, it's hard to see how a future Labour government would actually be able to stop it. Next one, please, Pete. So now we come to something that Tina is an absolute expert on, Blockadia. Despite all these uncertainties, it's still possible that preliminary work could start on the site as early as this spring. The next one, please, Pete. So acting on what is called the precautionary principle, I think we need to be thinking and planning now what our first steps will be, especially if all the legal challenges fail. And the next one, please. An example of that is precisely what we did at the end of last year. Knowing that the government's decision would be announced in early December, West Cumbria Friends of Earth and XR North Lakes, amongst others, made plans for a gathering at the mine site, which is what you can see there on the 10th of December, either to celebrate or, as it turned out, to protest the decision. Next one, please, Pete. The most obvious step, as I see it, is surely to begin making plans now for what Naomi Klein in 2014 termed Blockadia, putting bodies on the line to stop fossil fuel project. And as I've said, that's something Tina knows quite a lot about. Essentially, it's ordinary people stepping in where political and industry leaders are failing. And one aspect which happened at Preston New Road and helped, which Tina referred to, was getting climate and scientific experts to come and speak to the protesters and the media, and getting that shared widely on social media. And Tina was brilliant at that. Having those experts support publicly what was being done was important, in particular for helping grow the number of people turning up to join the protests. Next one, please, Pete. But the problem,
2 minutes, please, Alan.
Yeah. The problem with the coal mine site is that it's not as easily accessible as Preston New Road. Train connections to Whitehaven from mainline stations aren't good, and the site's not on a busy road. It's going to make protesters much more vulnerable to security and or police actions. And of course, we've lost an awful lot of rights for peaceful protests since 2019. But one thing the anti-fracking nanas did before Quadrilla began work on the fracking site is maybe what we should do, first of all, which is to have a mass trespass on site with as many big names as possible as speakers. If nothing else, it would give the mining company and the government a taste of what they can expect. For all of those reasons, a lot of thought is going to have to be given to what we do if the courts decide against us. But the important point I'm trying to make is we need to start thinking and planning now. We could have the next one, please, Pete. And sadly, although the National Labour Party has spoken out against the mine, the two local parties, Copeland and Workington, have decided to remain silent in case they lose votes, which is one reason why we need, I think, a strong eco-socialist movement more than ever. And if you don't know what eco-socialism is, that quote makes it very clear. The next one, please, Pete. And we're coming to the end here. It's basically, we have to a move away from the idea that we can green parts of capitalism. We heard that in the first talk. It's all myth and smoke and mirrors. But it's no good either replacing capitalism with 20th century conceptions of socialism. We need an ecologically sustainable world. And Green Left, our hosts, deserve an awful lot of credit, not just for hosting this, but for approaching left unity back in 2020 to suggest forming an eco-socialist alliance, which was something that Left Unity accepted very quickly. But we need to reach out further. Again, previous speakers have said the importance of trade unions. And one of the things that I think has been encouraging is been moves within XR that are also now reaching out towards the trade unions. And we come up to the last one here. This is, sorry, the next one, please, Pete. I missed that one out. Yeah. This is a bit of a dreadful plug here, but if you want to find out more about eco-socialism in a kind of eco-socialism for dummies way, then this little book is available from Resistance Books, and it's only £5. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. And towards the end there, some of Alan's remarks reminded me of something that someone said at a meeting I think Alan and I were both at maybe a year ago. Which is jointly hosted by the Anti-Capitalist Resistance, where someone said that environmentalism without socialism is basically just gardening. And that struck me as being comparable to some of the sentiments that Alan was expressing at the end. Once again, Alan, if you could make a copy of that slide pack available to Pete or Jay for sharing, I think that would be much appreciated. And
He's
I do
already
wish...
got it.
Okay, excellent. Well, yes, indeed, thank you. And I wish I'd been writing down there that enormous litany, that great long list of reasons why this coal mine proposal is simply not just absurd economically, absurd environmentally, but just downright dangerous. If you think about all the toxic waste, difficulties that they're going to have to get round, and the lack of expertise, the sheer unreality of their approach to this question. It's clearly politically and ideologically driven, and has nothing at all to do with welfare or safety or human well-being.
I can send you my notes if you want.
Yeah, that'd be much appreciated. I think you know, it's good for us to share always whatever information we do have. Now we get to the stage, we have just about 25 minutes left. What I'm going to do now is open it up. I think perhaps what I'll do is I'll take groups of questions in maybe threes, and then quickly go to each of our speakers to reply. If someone instead doesn't wish to ask a question, wants to make a point, very welcome to do that, but please let's keep it brief because there are quite a few people at the meeting and very little time. Can I also just say that since a few people have started to drift off now because our main speakers have finished, we are Green Left, we are the eco-socialist tendency within the Green Party of England and Wales. I'm going to ask Pete or someone else to share in the chat contact details for people who may have heard of Green Left but don't know very much about what we do in the Green Party, who might be interested in joining or having a conversation with us. We'll put some contact details in the chat, and it would be lovely to hear from you because there are lots and lots of new faces on the call this evening, and I think that's a very encouraging and exciting thing. So please raise your Zoom hand, or if you cannot do that or it doesn't work for you, use your voice. First up, I've got Maggie from the SLACC. Maggie. We can't hear you, I'm afraid. Sorry, your microphone's not working. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can. Thank you.
Better. Yeah. Okay. I was trying to use a different microphone. Okay. So I'm South Lakes Action on Climate Change representative on the our legal case against the coal mine, and know lots of people on here. And thanks very much, Alan, and everybody else for those great chats. I do just want to make one point. The kind of things that Alan was mentioning about the pollution, the dangers, the risks, and so on at the coal mine. I had a chat with him about it, and I shared some of those things as I've shared with other people. They are not part of the public inquiry or any evidence that we presented. They're from the evidence that the West Cumbria Mining had to submit in their environmental impact assessment. And quite honestly, we couldn't afford another expert to take these things forward. And so our legal cases are about basically the end use emissions, the scope 3 emissions being ignored, similar issues to what was said at the very beginning, and aspects of sort of unfairness and bias and et cetera. But all those issues that I mentioned about the risks at the mine, I think would come into sharp focus if we were needing to get into Blockadia, because there's so much apparent, so supposed support in Whitehaven for the mine, and it's an exposed place to do actions. So I've been raising these issues both with XR scientists, and I raised them with Alan. And of course, the fact that Whitehaven Harbour is now bright red with possible heavy metal contamination, which would be very similar to what's under the mine site, may be something that we can pick up going forward. So I hope that's not too much. It's not a question really, except unless people want to say whether they think that kind of issue should be taken forward as part of Blockadia issues, even if it's not in the legal case. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie, much appreciated. So I have Roy, and then I think I have Jay. Are you indicating with your, oh no, you perhaps not. Well, if you are, please raise your Zoom hand or let me know otherwise. But let's go to Roy Sanderson, please. You're on mute, Roy.
Yeah. I noticed in Germany there's going to be a new coal mine. Is it a similar argument they're putting forward in Germany to what they're putting forward in the UK? I just wonder if other countries are doing the same thing in Western Europe as well.
Thank you, Roy. Any other questions? I would like to batch them up, but if not, we'll go to our speakers with that one. Okay, I mean, my understanding, Roy, is that in Germany, the main argument is the strategic need to reduce dependence on Russian fossil fuels by, amongst other things, continuing to use lignite coal for a longer period than had originally been anticipated in legislation. But it seems extraordinarily foolish because they are choosing lignite, which of course is one of the most polluting forms of coal imaginable. And sadly, the Green Party in Germany appears to be doing us no favours, outflanking the Social Democrats in their espousal of coal mining, and indeed their support for legal action against those taking action to protest against it. But let's go to our speakers on this one. We'll go to, in reverse order, we'll go to Alan and then Tina and then Ellen. So Alan first, please.
I think Alan's still muted.
Yes, yes, Alan.
Yeah, I was saying that I felt somewhat as an imposter talking about this when you've got people like Tina and Maggie on here, and also Hazel from CAFS is on here, know a lot more about all these things as well. I think the main point that I would make is something I think it was Tina that said, and which is to use all the kind of possible weapons to be aggressive that we possibly got, first of all. And yeah, it's hugely important that we have these legal challenges and so on, because it does, on the surface of it, look very clearly an illegal decision by the government. So hopefully the courts will do the right thing. But the other thing is to reach out to as many different groups and organizations as possible, and which is what we tried to do with Green Mondays. It wasn't just the Green Party, which some people initially thought it was. It was basically any environmental groups that were concerned about aspects of the environment, whether it was fracking or whether it was something else, just coming together to oppose something that was just not the right thing to do, given where we are in the climate and the ecological emergencies and so on. And I had to sort of rush through, really, because I'm very encouraged by what's been happening in XR since the lockdown began, because at the beginning of it all, the general view was you needed to keep politics and ideology out of the climate movement in order to get as many people as possible in. And the interesting thing is that there are growing sections of XR community, and it happened first of all in XR Scotland, which is one of the reasons why they've separated out from XR UK, is the recognition that we have to be aware of what the overall problem is, as well as the specific problem that we're protesting against. And that is the economic system that we live under, that puts profit before people and before the planet. And to say that we don't need to define the system and what we're going to replace it is a bit like going to a doctor and the doctor says, well, I think you're ill. What you really want is that the doctor to say, you're ill, you've got this particular disease, and this is how we're going to combat it. And it's precisely what we have to do with the particular general problem we have, which is not just the coal mine or a fracking site here. Why is it always happening all the time? Why do you approve 30+ new oil and gas projects when you're supposed to be in a climate emergency? It's because it's what the system does, and therefore you need to change the system. And there are so many people in XR now, even if they're not prepared to use the word capitalist, they do call it a commercial economy that puts profits before people and before the planet. And this is where eco-socialism is such an important thing. But what we need to do is not just talk to ourselves, which is what we tend to do, but we need to reach out to as many different groups like XR, like the trade unions and so on, and get them on board, because that's how, in the end, you're going to get a big enough movement that's going to not just stop the coal mine in Cumbria, but stop all of this stuff that's going on. That mustn't go on. We heard from Danny, you know, James Hansen, one of the most respected people in the world on the climate, is saying if it wasn't for pollution in the air, we'd be over 2 degrees anyway. So that's me, sorry.
Thank you, Alan. I would draw everyone's attention to a couple of useful contributions from Anne in the Coal Action Network in the chat about the European coal situation. Very useful background reference material there. So we're going to go to Tina and then to Ellen in that order. For any comments on either Maggie's contribution, which is first up, or Roy's question about comparability with the coal situation in Germany, either or both. Tina first, please.
I'd be happy to give up my space and let Anne speak on the German coal mine, because I have to admit, I don't know enough about that. And it seems like she has some great information in the chat. And as for, I missed the first one, I'm so sorry. What was the first question or comment? And I can't remember, it was too long ago, my head's full.
Well, I think, well, I shouldn't speak for Maggie, I'm sure Maggie could remind us, but there were a number of points, one of which was perhaps some of the sensitivities around the possibility of Blockadia, given the level of local support for the government proposal. Maggie, if I've misrepresented, yes, let's hear from Maggie directly.
I was just, if you were out of the room, so to speak, Tina, at the time.
My dog barked and I had to shut her up.
Okay, it was just that because of the sensitivities in the area and the things that Alan said, I brought up and helped both Alan and some XR people to look at some of these dangers of the coal mine. So I was talking about some of the dangers which are more akin to the problems you had with fracking in terms of water pollution and pollution of the sea, etc., but they were not part of the legal, they're not part of the public inquiry because we didn't fight them at the public inquiry, and they've never been properly challenged. So there's quite a lot of work to do in the kind of interesting things you said about going around the doors and so on, to try and get some of the people who live in houses very close to here to think about what some sort of company that finally steps up to actually implement this does with the hazardous waste that they dig out of this site, and whether or not they put it in the bunds around the outside or whether it goes in the lorries down the road to try and find a hazardous waste site. So I think if this particular group of people we've got here could do a lot of really interesting work in advance to come up with a really good way of taking this forward if we get to Blockadia.
What you said about that
public comments.
And what you said about that public inquiry reminds me that when we had ours on fracking, we actually couldn't mention all of those things that really matter to us: the air pollution, the risk for the water, and so on. None of that was going to be accepted. All we could talk about was traffic and noise. That's all we were allowed to do. But it was enough. We won on that one. Then, of course, Westminster overturned it. But talking about traffic and noise worked for some people. And also we managed to get a doctor in to explain that a lack of sleep through the noise and the worry was going to impact your health. So we could get health impacts in, but not that. Not the real health impacts to, breast cancer, early term loss in pregnancy, and all those things that fracking would bring. With regard to how you deal with your community, A, I would say they're probably lying about how much support there is. And B, if whatever support there is because they've already lied to those people. So they've already lied to them in their communications and PR. And offsetting that, you just need everyday folk who look and sound like your community, like you do, and and all the work you're doing. And well, you know what I mean? Like if you host the public meetings, and you put on a public meeting in a local church or a local sports center, and I think what people need, particularly in an area like that, is that reassurance that those jobs will come from somewhere, and that the 500 jobs they're promising, I bet you, includes those. Well, I can't remember what the word is. It's like a supply line job. Like, there's these jobs on the site. Like, they told us there'd be so many. Oh no, because they told us there'd be X number of jobs, and we found out that they were counting additional waitresses in the cafes locally, additional, drivers, all sorts of other things. And in the States, they count, because fracking arrives in sparse places, they count literally, because it comes as a man cap, additional lap dancers into the work being created in the community figures. I mean, they don't talk about the increase in crime that comes with the man camp or the change of community. And that's another thing that I found hit our locals, was you talked about how does that community look and feel now? How will it look and feel if this goes ahead? They need to start picturing that. And what Alan pointed out as well about when we did the pre-invasion, we did it years before. So in 2014, our 26 nanas threw ourselves mercilessly over fence and held the site for 3 weeks. It was an empty site, nothing was there. We even checked that the cows hadn't been in for weeks, and we went in and held that site for 3 weeks. And people were like, what an absolute disruption, how dare you ruin, you know, this area and be on our site causing inconvenience. We were like, well, you get us for 3 weeks with a few tents and some information leaflets, or you're going to get about 10 years of drill rigs and workers and 500 vehicle movements per frac. Which would you prefer? And that really helped to let the local community see exactly where it was going to be and how it was going to impact them. Again, I'm not as familiar with the community area around where you are, but I will definitely feel like I ought to come up and have a look and see if we can't throw a lot of nanas at you or build more nanas. You know, we need nanas there. I won't go on. Oh, apart from one other thing I did want to say is that if you are going to take action, I would highly recommend videoing and live streaming, because if you're remote particularly, they will try and get away with it. And also, we used to, when I said somewhere for everybody, we used to invite a lot of our residents, don't come and get involved in the actions, don't come and get involved in anything we're doing, but please sit over there with your chair and your flask and be a witness, because the police will behave better with witnesses.
Thank you. Now we are beginning to run out of time, so I'm going to go to Ellen for a couple of minutes, and then we'll have a hand from Cynthia. But let's go to Ellen first. Maybe just up to 2 minutes, please, Ellen.
Yeah, I can just pick up on the thing about legal challenges and community-based direct action. I think where we are with the Drax campaign is we are challenging we are opposing the planning application for a significant, nationally significant infrastructure project, which is the addition of carbon capture to the wood burners. And actually, it's like there are so many reasons, as Tina was saying, the grounds on which you can object to these things are so limited in terms of planning law. We're very much, pretty much hamstrung by the fact that national planning, national policy statements hold biomass to be carbon neutral. And because it's not a planning application to put in biomass, it's a planning application to fit carbon capture to an already consented biomass burning plant. So, you know, their solicitors are constantly arguing that we can't even talk, that's out of scope for this for this planning application, because that's already been consented and it's already government policy. But we have to just keep on, you know, bringing back and back. Look, you know, it's a system, like they're calling it a negative emissions technology. So you've got to look at the whole thing. You've got to look at the you've got to look at the supply chain emissions. You've got to look at the total loss of carbon sequestration in the forests, etc., etc. You've got to look at the pipeline, even though the pipeline will be a separate planning application that's examined separately from a different and submitted by a different company. But you've got to look at all of it. It doesn't make sense not to. And we've got no idea whether that'll get anywhere. But you know, I think we're all prepared for the possibility that it won't get anywhere. So I think that it's really, yeah, I absolutely agree that the wider campaign is if any, is more important. It's the awareness raising amongst all the local communities that are going to be affected. And I mean, I think we're in nowhere near the position where a direct action campaign would get any local support at the moment. But yeah, you know, if we can be well enough organised, and if we can do the door knocking and the local meetings and the, you know, talking to people face to face about the greenwashing, particularly around the jobs, then, you know, we may get to that point where we can stop it. And I think that, as I indicated in the slides, I think probably their weak point actually is probably to do with the CO2 pipeline, because there are already been horrendous accidents, at least one in the United States, where people are being left with horrendous permanent lung damage from a pipeline rupture. And yeah, so I think that's the kind of thing that you can mobilize people around. I just want to, I think for my final comment, if I can squeeze it in, I really just want to go back to the question of organising in trade unions, because if we don't manage to actually change these, some of these, it's not everywhere, but if we don't manage to change some of these that are supportive of these technologies, and that are actually going along with the kind of narrative that this is where the jobs are, and we either have these jobs or nothing, and that are actually failing to really say, look, there are at least 4 times as many jobs just in homes retrofitting as there are in all this in this nonsense. And that's only talking about, nobody's talking. We've been talking about, Germany trying to cope with, not having Russian energy supplies. Well, it's about cutting demand. In the last year in this country, we could have retrofitted hundreds of thousands of homes, at least to, not to a perfect extent, but to an extent that would have hugely impacted on the levels of energy poverty that we've seen. So
okay.
But yeah, but we have to be more organised about that. I think we have to have an organised programme of getting people. I'm
sorry to interrupt, Ellen, but I really do just want to take Cynthia before, I'll come back to you in just a second. So what I'm going to do is take Cynthia, and then I'm going to give each of our speakers 30 seconds to wind up, and then I think we really must close it, because I don't want the meeting to overrun. That tends to put people off if we get into the habit of doing that. So Cynthia Dorelli, please, and then.
Thank you. Am I loud enough? Am I all right?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, Cynthia.
I just wanted to come back on the point about awareness raising and suggest that I think that discussion, that dialogue needs to talk about roots. I mean, what we want is a movement of the people, of all the people, globally. It's not a one country thing. This is a global issue. And you have to ask yourself, when was there a society when the needs of all the people, let alone the planet, mattered at all? Historically, we've never been in a place like that. We have been in every country in the world, almost, not quite, living under in a condition called possibly called democracy, but where a certain group of people run everything for their interests. It produces horrendous things. It produces buildings falling down and killing people when there's an earthquake, a horrendous earthquake, known to be coming, etc. Look around the world. Look at the floods that happened last year in the last part of last year in Bangladesh. There were always things that could have been done that were not being done, and that's because nobody could stand against those people. They set the policies. They don't consider the well-being of the majority. So while it's good to talk about the well-being of the majority, and that needs to triumph, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that we're trying to create something new in that. It's not, oh, we forgot the people. No, you never wanted to think would be my argument. So I think that's quite important to have that local root. Because one of the things that's happened with people talk more and read more and get together more, they start to look at their history of their communities. And that's where you see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cynthia. So, as I said, to wind up, I'm going to give each of our speakers the opportunity for 30 seconds just to make a few closing remarks. And this time we'll do it in a slightly different order. We shall go, first of all, to Tina, and then to Ellen, and then to, Tina, and then Ellen, and then Alan. So, Tina first, please. 30 seconds.
Okay. Oh, I've lost my place now. Okay, you're not losing. until it's over. You know, someone said to me once during the anti-fracking campaign, what happens if you lose? And I said, there is no way that can happen because I'm not able to stop until I win. Take your wins on a regular basis because you need that for yourself and your heart, which is, no, I didn't win the fracking. It took a long time for us to win the fracking, and then the earthquake did it, really. But every time someone new emerged on that street and became an activist, that was a win. You know, I've always said that as soon as you open the door marked activism or, you know, campaigning, it's a sheer drop. You know, you can't come in and go, well, I'm just going to stop this one frack site that I'm going home and put my feet up, because during stopping that, you realized that if they did that, what the hell else have they done? And what the hell else are they planning? So you take your wins by, I mean, particularly for me with the nanas, we had women in their late 70s coming to activism for the first time and discovering their voice. And then they were the most stubborn, powerful and effective people I have ever seen. And they do it with a certain dignity that you just can't measure, you know? So you're always, you will win at some point, because you probably won't go home until you have. So settle in.
Thank you very much indeed. Ellen, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I have to say, comment on Maggie's message in the chat, actually, that the issue of people being seen as middle class elitist gooders that parachute in and tell people what to do. I think that is really an issue. But I think I think the one thing that I want to say, and sorry for trying to get it in before because I didn't realise that we'd have another chance, but please, if you're not already, please make sure that you get involved with the campaign against climate change trade union group, because I think that what we're going to do now is try to do something a bit more systematic about, you know, identifying what everybody's doing in their own unions, in their own different areas, joining people up who can potentially work together, whether it's within a particular union or whether it's around a particular issue, and also trying to join forces a lot more systematically with the Climate Justice Coalition Trade Union Caucus, which has very similar values, perhaps not identical, but very, very similar. And also the XR trade union group, which has been already mentioned tonight. So this is an organising kind of problem, really, that organisations have their own identities and their own culture, but we've really got to find ways of working together so that we're not just like working in silos and reinventing the wheel all the time. We're all going in the same direction. So that's what, I would just really urge people to get involved with those organisations and step up on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Ellen. Much appreciated. And I don't know if you have readily available any contact details for those organisations that you could post in the chat, but otherwise perhaps email them to Pete, and we'll see what we can do about certainly circulating them amongst our own members in Green Left. Thank you very much indeed.
I've put the web page where you can affiliate in the chat, but I'll do it again.
Yes, please, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. And then finally, Alan, same deal, 60 seconds to wind up, please.
Well, probably won't need it.
Sorry, 30 seconds.
Yes, I thought we didn't need that. It's really to reiterate the point that Ellen and Tina made, which is to do as many different things as you can do, and to realise that different people can do only some things and not other things, but every single thing helps. And this is an anecdote. Some of you on this call will know that the last few months I've been somewhat housebound, not out of choice, but I did just the other day do a very short walk down part of the lake, and I bumped into 4 people from the west coast of Cumbria who, as we got talking, first of all made the point that there wasn't that much support amongst local people for the coal mine. And then it emerged that I was the one who had just written a letter that had been published in the Whitehaven News and the Times and Star. And they said that letters have a big impact on a lot of people. So if you are like me, where you're essentially restricted to the keyboard at the moment, don't think it's just, there's nothing you can do. Writing letters is one thing you can do, and anybody can do that, you know, whatever their health issues are. So I'd finish on that.
Thank you, Alan. Maggie says in the chat, shame we didn't have an opportunity to hear from some of the other activists on the call. We have Anne, Daniel, Hazel, Henry, etc., etc. Green Left is always keen to hear from people who would be potential speakers at meetings like this. So if you could offer to come along and talk about any of these issues at a future Green Left meeting, please get in touch with Pete Murray, who's the Green Left Secretary, and Pete will be very happy to get back in touch, and we'll see what we can do about scheduling you into one of our future meetings. Just to echo what Alexandra says in the chat, thanks to all the speakers, absolutely fantastic, informative and inspiring, which is the best combination of all, I always think. And thank you to you, the audience, for coming along this evening and giving up part of your evening to educate yourselves and each other about this crucial topic. Absolutely fantastic, and more power to everyone's elbow. Thank you all very much indeed. Look out for details of our next meeting, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thanks once again.